Welcome back to Unsolicited Feedback, the podcast where we cut through the noise, skip the corporate jargon, and get real about what actually drives results. Because let's be honest, hope is not a business strategy. I'm your host, Chuck Knabusch, the operations guy. And after 40 plus years across the military, corporate America, and now entrepreneurship, I've learned and seen what works, what breaks, and why leadership planning and execution are the greatest separators between average and exceptional results. As you're catching the replay, send your thoughts or challenges directly to me at chuck@1310.com, chuck@13ten.com. Hey, as your time matters, let's jump right into today's topic. Once again, I've got a guest on. His name is Scott Doggett, and he comes from the National Academy of Leadership Development. Scott, can you tell us a little bit about the Academy and what you guys do there?
Yeah, we are creating a national movement to try to help organizations rehumanize their workplaces in this day and age of AI. And as AI becomes more prevalent, really helping leaders put people first again and focus back on workplace culture so that they can drive those results like you were talking about earlier. So that's our whole mission. And we use servant leadership and modernize servant leadership for today's workplace. We've got a faculty, about 25 faculty across the country that are really passionate about servant leadership and helping all types of organizations do just that.
You said rehumanize. I'm starting to hear that term here and there,
Yeah.
especially as AI continues to go ahead and grow and expand. Can you tell me a little bit about what you mean?
I think post COVID, I think there was a lot of damage done where we took our eye off of culture and people, and we were trying to just survive and figure out how do we keep the lights on. And so there was a lot of workplace reduction and a lot of extra pressure being put on driving results. And that pressure was put on the backs of the people. And at the end of the day, we have to remember where results come from, and that is the people. And if I had a nickel for every time I had employees around the country tell me, Scott, we don't need another pizza party. We just want to be seen. We just want to feel valued again. We want to be respected. And because people don't feel that, our engagement levels in this country are at an all-time low. And if engagement levels are low, then you know you're not getting the results that you could be getting. And the best way to get results is to, again, improve that level of engagement and help your employees feel valued, respected, and then they are going to give in return more of themselves. So that's where that humanity comes in. And I think AI helps us get there because AI helps us get that time back that we haven't had before for generations. So if we can use that time to refocus on our people, everybody wins.
So, what does that engagement and that respect look like? Because again, those are great terms. Sometimes they resonate, sometimes they don't, because we don't always have a clear definition of what they mean.
Yeah. So what we teach is first and foremost is understanding that just as human beings, when we see people, we put a label on somebody. And whatever that label is, it determines how we treat that person. So if I see you based on a personality trait or a title, or you're my top performer or you're my low performer, I'm going to treat you very differently. And the way that I treat you is the way that I make you feel. And the way that I make you feel then translates into the way that I start to believe about myself. And all of that impacts how I perform and the level of effort. And let's just equate that to my level of engagement at work. So, what we try to remind people is that everybody on your team is priceless human being, right? So, if we can put that label first on people, that everybody is a priceless human being, see them first as that and treat people with that basic dignity and respect that they deserve, then they will start to feel that in return. And then the next step is the hardest step, which is also recognizing that everybody on your team is very uniquely different and getting to know them on that individual basis so that you can understand what those unique strengths are, what their struggles are, what their goals are, how they like to communicate, how they like to be recognized. And when you take the time to get to know them at that level, that's when people start to feel known and they start to feel seen and valued. And then again, they will then start to feel part of the team and start to feel like, okay, I want to stay here, be part of this, and I'm going to give more of myself to this organization. The piece that's missing right now.
That's great, Scott. Hey, one of the themes I talk about a lot is that organizations don't usually fail because people don't care. They fail because leadership never becomes execution. When you look across leaders maybe you've developed, what's the biggest disconnect between knowing leadership and actually practicing leadership?
Yeah, I think the biggest disconnect is not recognizing that whether it's we talk about culture a lot and the understanding that I know a lot of leaders recognize that culture is important, but I think they don't recognize where culture comes from. And we think that it's the big moments, it's the big town hall meetings that we put together, or it's the big strategies and the strategy decks that we spend all this time on. And not that those things aren't important, but it's recognizing that it's the little things that happen throughout the course of the day. It's the reaction that I have when an employee is presenting an idea in the meeting and I'm not paying attention, or I roll my eyes and I might be thinking about something completely different. But that signal that I send is so powerful and it has a ripple effect. And it's a story that then I tell myself as an employee that says, I'm not valued here. My leader doesn't even listen to me. And it's 1,000 of those interactions that happen throughout the course of the day that really translates for me as an employee. That's what culture means to me. And that's, I think leaders miss that opportunity to recognize the influence that they have on performance and results. It's the little things that they need to be paying attention to. It's not the big stuff. And I think that's why leadership training often fails is we spend in this country alone, we spend $200 billion a year trying to fix employee engagement, and that needle never moves. And because it's not a program problem, it really is an environment problem. We need to fix our environment first and recognize that me as a leader, I need to make sure that my team feels really good. They feel seen, valued, respected first before I start to layer on whether it's recognition programs or more training or more. Oh, programs are great, but it's not going to fix the problem if I don't feel that just that first step of feeling valued and respected as a human being on the team.
No, I agree with you. Kind of a fundamental question, maybe backing up, and I know your organization's title probably answers this, but I want your insight. Can leadership actually be taught, or is it mostly just learned through experience?
I think it can definitely be taught. I think anybody can learn anything. I think you need to have the desire, though. The motivation is so important because that authenticity is felt. An employee will know if you genuinely care about them and their growth and their success. And that's really the key to creating that kind of environment that we're talking about is as a servant leader, your job is to come in every single day and make sure that your team is taken care of and that they have the tools to do their job and that they feel supported and that you're advocating for them. And if you don't have that desire to help people and to help people grow and to help people succeed, then you're not in the right seat, if you will, on the bus. So you need to have the right motive and want to be a leader for the right reasons. But if you have the desire, then we can teach you the skills for sure.
Yeah, that's great. I firmly believe that myself.
Yeah.
So many organizations invest heavily in training. I've been in organizations before where, oh my God, the training that they want to go ahead and give is constant, almost to the point where you can't get any work done.
Yeah.
But very little is done in true development. How do you distinguish between someone who's being trained and someone who's actually being developed as a leader?
Yeah. So and again, I spent, like you, I spent half of my career in operations and then I found myself into training and development. And I always say this training is like 10% of someone's development plan, or it should be, right? So going to a class or reading books or going to webinars, that literally, just like when we learned how to drive a car for the first time, we took driver's ed. That's the formal part of when we're learning to any new skill. And I think that one of the big mistakes is we send leaders to classes and we think that's going to be enough to make them effective. And whether it's coaching or motivating or developing people, that's such a small part of it. 20% of that development comes through finding a good coach or a mentor to help someone develop in that skill. But 70% comes from experience and through getting your hands on and finding opportunities to practice that skill. Just like when we learn to drive, you got to get behind the wheel and just experience different elements of that skill. So I think opportunity to apply that knowledge that you learn in a classroom in a real life way on in the workplace is the biggest gap that I see, at least in organizations that try to invest a lot in training, but they don't give the opportunity for them to practice then after the training.
Absolutely. Because you have to go ahead and make it your own. You have to go ahead and be able to apply it. I align with the US Army that says leaders have basically three jobs. They need to lead, they need to achieve, and they need to develop. But at what point does development become the leader's responsibility instead of HR's?
I think HR really is just a support group that helps you provide some resources, and that's really it. To me, the development is really a shared responsibility between the leader and the employee, because the employee needs to have that desire too for that development. That's another gap that I see a lot of times is organizations try to force development on people that don't want it. I see a top performer and I want to make them a leader, but if they don't have the desire to be a leader, it doesn't work. And we promote people into these roles that don't necessarily want that promotion, and then they don't end up being successful and nobody wins. So I think that 50-50 shared responsibility is really between the leader and the employee. And that's why it's so important to get to know your people, get to know what their goals and aspirations are. Sometimes people just want to be successful in their current role, and you don't want to ignore them. You just want to continue to feed them and help them grow and develop within their current space. Sometimes they want to grow laterally, they want to grow into a different role in a different department. And sometimes they may want to grow outside of your organization completely. And I support people that way as well, because it's just a way to keep them engaged until it's time for them to leave. So get to know your people, because at the end of the day, your goal is to keep your team members engaged so that they're giving you their best work every day so that you get the most results that you can achieve as a leader.
Absolutely agree that HR is not where all training and development lives. It needs to go ahead and live with the leader. So certainly understand that. I certainly also understand the difference between a leadership track that people who want to become leaders or managers and those who just love doing what they're doing and they want to be the best technician, for lack of a better term. And that's it. Rather than just saying, hey, we want to take the best technician and move them over and put them in a leadership role. The next thing you know, it's a whole different set of skills and they may not have been developed. They may not be skills that they have any desire to go ahead and develop. So, yes, there are multiple tracks to success, and it depends on what it is that the individual wants, not always what the organization wants.
Chuck, and
So,
I'll also say almost worse than that are when, and I see this in a lot of different industries, healthcare, for example, a lot of CEOs of the hospitals today are physicians that get promoted into CEO roles. You name the industry. There's hospitality, which is the industry I came from. I see it in so many different industries where there are employees, frontline employees that are superstars that do want to be managers or leaders, and they get promoted into those roles. And then we don't provide them the leadership training, and then they continue to just grow because they were the best in what they were doing, and we don't develop them in the leadership skills. And again, now the employees are getting that experience, and that's where we see a lot of this disengagement and these toxic cultures are created because we've never taken the time to develop leadership skills in our top performers that we're promoting.
absolutely. So, one of the things that I say a lot through my podcast or even through my content that I post is that firefighting feels productive because you're always busy. But it's usually evidence that the operating system isn't working. From your perspective, why do otherwise good leaders become addicted to solving today's problems instead of building tomorrow's company or
Yeah.
organization or capability?
It's the whirlwind of the day, right? You can get sucked up into that very easily. We all could, right? If it's all about how do we choose to spend our that limited amount of time that we have throughout the course of the day. And I recognize that we all have pressure to get results. And that pressure drives that behavior to put out that fire and that urgency to, there's a lot of things that we have that we need to get done, or else there's consequences. I get that. And so part of it is learning how to delegate. And part of developing people is learning to delegate tasks and responsibilities to get it off of your plate. But it's a great way to help develop that next generation, if you will, of leaders potentially. But this is where, again, I think AI can help us, because a lot of that stuff that is urgent, that we have to get done, that is taking up so much of our time, we can now leverage a lot of the tools that exist today to help us do that work so much faster so that we can reclaim that time and spend time doing stuff that is more proactive, that is more strategy or more future focused. And again, allow us to connect more with our people and do more team building, do more mentoring, do more development. And so that we're not delegating that off to HR or just putting it on the back burner and saying, we're going to get to it, we're going to get to it, but we're too busy because it's month end or whatever the excuses that we have this week.
No, absolutely. And I look at it a lot like you can't see the forest through the trees, and the leader needs to go ahead and be doing forest management. He or she can't be looking at just one tree here or one tree there. Even though that might be the tree that's on fire, you have to look at the whole forest and say, what's good or what's bad for the whole forest, and how do we go ahead and manage that? I'm sure you've seen literally hundreds, maybe even thousands of leaders over the years, and especially through your academy. What are one or two behaviors that you consistently see in exceptional leaders that most people completely overlook?
I think it boils down to me again on for the exceptional leaders that I have worked with and that I've experienced are the ones that see themselves as that their role is to support those that are entrusted into their care and that it doesn't feel like they're the boss and that they are championing for their team and they're advocating for the team's need. They know what's going on in their world. So there's a reality. That Undercover Boss show drives me nuts. I think every executive should know what's going on in their world, but the best leaders do know because employees want to know. They don't want perfection, right? They recognize that things can't be perfect, but they want their leaders to know that they know what's going on. And I think the best leaders get it and they support that and they provide support when it's needed. They provide flexibility in people's lives when they need it. They provide appreciation for the hard work. They recognize when people are working hard and they share that. And so it's stuff that doesn't cost any money, but it's that genuine care that comes through that people really appreciate and value that keeps people, that really makes employees want to follow those leaders anywhere they go. That's to me, that's the test of a great leader is if that leader leaves the organization, people want to follow them wherever they go.
Well, and I think, it's more than just the awareness. You talk about the awareness, and I think you really mean something far deeper because awareness is just the first step, but and when you say support, I suspect you're talking about things like if they have an obstacle that's preventing them from achieving what they need to do, go ahead and help remove that obstacle. That might be giving the team authority. It might be using your authority, or maybe you have to go up a level or two to get authority to allow them to go ahead and accomplish whatever their mission is. It's overcoming the obstacles. It's giving them the tools necessary and setting up the environment so they can be
A
successful.
lot.
And I think
Yes.
that goes along with servant leadership, but sometimes we talk about these terms and we think everybody understands them. Sometimes we have to get down into a little bit more detail and
Yeah.
explain what that means. And I think these are the things that you're talking about. Am I correct?
Yeah, and that's what we do in our workshops is we really help leaders dissect this and make it very practical. And again, we share that when they walk away, they recognize that this isn't rocket science. It really is simple stuff, but you have to commit to it. And simple doesn't mean easy. And I recognize that. So it really does require a shift of, again, how you spend your day and how you look at your day and your responsibility as a leader. And I came from the service industry where the customer was the main focus. And there's so much work being done in today's world around customer experience. And there's whole departments around CX, customer experience, and all of this. And we understand that world. Yet what we don't remember is that employee experience needs to come first because the employees are the ones delivering the customer experience. So if you don't get the employee experience right first, you're never going to be able to deliver a great product or a great service for your customer. So leaders' main responsibility needs to be in taking care of the employees, setting them up, making them feel the best they can, give them the right tools and support so that they can then go off and just deliver the best possible experience for your customers. And that's where brand loyalty and profits and growth, that's where that all comes from.
Excellent. So, at what point does leadership stop being about the individual leader and start becoming about designing a system that other people can succeed inside?
Well, I think it has to be for it to work. And again, I think when I look at organizations that really adopt this, I'm thinking about the 3Ms and the Chick-fil-A's of the world. It really needs to be top down. It needs to be a system. And we look at it from three different levels. We look at frontline leadership. They have a very specific role in because they're really the ones that are affecting most of the employees in an organization. And so that is day-to-day coaching and frontline type leadership. And then we look at that middle level, which is tough because you're leading down and up. And so you're managing expectations. That's a tough role to be in. And then the executive level is critical because they're the ones that really own systems and policies and programs. And so that's where we really need to shift mindset around every program, every decision that we make as an organization. How does it impact our people? Because at the end of the day, that's what's going to truly drive whether or not a policy is going to make something hard for an employee to do, or is it going to free us and empower us to be able to remove that friction and make the experience for me better? And so everybody plays a role in this. It can't just be one leader, because I've seen that so many times where you'll have one leader who's doing great in a department and they're getting great results, but you literally go to the next office and they're getting bad results. And it's only because, again, the environment that's created under two different leadership styles. So it really needs to be something that an organization looks at holistically, not just as individually as leaders.
No, absolutely. I'm going to ask you to challenge something.
Sure.
What's one piece of conventional leadership advice that you think has done more harm than good, and why?
I think there's a couple expressions out there that I've been taught throughout my career that, again, doesn't they don't sound bad, but I think just psychologically they do some damage. One is that what gets measured gets done. And I believe that, right? I do believe that's an expression that is true, but it takes the focus around how it gets done is, to me, is more important than what gets done. So I've seen too many examples where the focus is on the results and people get rewarded on those results. And for an example, when I was a GM, I used to run hotels and resorts before I got into training. And there were incentives if you came in under budget every year as a GM. But there wasn't incentives on how you get those results. So there was a lot of bad behavior that came in getting those results. So employees weren't given even basic things like uniforms or tools, or there was no recognition or training because GMs wanted to save that money so that they could get their bonus at the end of the year. So I think, again, the focus needs to be first on creating that environment to get the results and trusting that the best way to get results is to create this great culture where you put your people first. The other one is people are our greatest assets. As soon as you start to see people as assets or resources, you've already lost the game because you've now dehumanized your workforce versus recognizing that you have human beings with feelings and struggles and they've got stories. I know we try to tell people to leave your struggles at home when you get to the office. We're not built that way as human beings. We need to recognize that and have empathy for that and be able to be, again, supportive when they need support. And so, anyways, those are two things that I've experienced my entire career that I think if we can get rid of those, we'd be much better off.
And I think to your first point about we achieve what we measure, because you're right. If we go ahead, we need the how, we need the organizational values put in there
Yes.
because we're not always measuring the right stuff, or we're not measuring, and I hate to say enough stuff because I think in some cases we measure way too much. But we need to go ahead and also put in those value measures to say, hey, are we measuring this correctly? Not just the outcome, but how we got to the outcome. Because I've been in organizations before where when budgeting time came up, there was some sandbagging. We're going to go ahead and set our achievement here, or we're going to go ahead and put our budget way up there, knowing that we're never going to spend it. Why? Because we can look good at the end of the year.
Yeah.
And yes, is that a little bit disingenuous? Absolutely. Is that criminal? Probably not, but it certainly goes against the organization's values if they're really wanting to live them. So sometimes those value behaviors need to also be part of what we measure, which is the how we get to that achievement, how we get to that mile.
Yeah.
So I think that that was a great point that you brought up.
And I think things like employee satisfaction and employee engagement, and even cost of turnover, we don't measure cost of turnover in the P&L statements. I think if we did that, if we put a numeric number to cost of turnover, it would get a lot more attention. Guys, that there is a cost of turnover, but we don't share that enough to get the attention because it's huge, right? That's a huge cost to organizations.
Absolutely. So if you could convince every CEO, every founder, and
Yep.
every operational leader to believe just one thing about
Yep.
leadership before they walked back into tomorrow morning,
Yep.
what would it be?
It would be that you cannot force employees to give their best work to you, to give that discretionary effort that is so valuable, right? You can't force them to give you these ideas that could generate you millions of extra dollars in revenue or point out things that could cost you lots of money. You have to earn that. And the only way to earn that is by first treating them with that dignity, that respect that they deserve as a human being. And that doesn't cost any money. That's the good news, is it doesn't cost any money. So if you want to get greater results, you need to start to refocus on your people and start to see, value, respect your people, and they will in turn give so much more of themselves and trust that you will get the results in the end.
Excellent. So, one final question of the interview before we start
Yeah.
wrapping up. One question I like to ask leaders is, are you maximizing your opportunities or are you just optimizing them? Looking at leadership development today, where do you think organizations are optimizing instead of truly maximizing?
I think for my observations and for today, a lot of leadership development is been minimized. Their budgets have been cut. There's been, again, because I think COVID and all the things that are going on in the world, there's not a lot of leadership development going on. So I think there's a huge opportunity for organizations to focus on this. And again, 31% engagement around the country is the number right now. And there's just huge opportunities for recognizing that if you want to drive that number, you need to create a better culture. If you want to create a better culture, you got to start taking better care of your people. And the people that need to take care of your people are your leaders. So I think we need to do much better in that space.
So, Scott, if people are interested, how do they reach out to you? How do they find you and your organization to go ahead and get more information?
They can visit our website at ld.com and all the information is right there and they can reach out and I'd love to connect with anybody interested in learning more about us.
Excellent. So that's a wrap for today's episode of Unsolicited Feedback. Thanks for joining me, but don't just nod along. Apply something from today's conversation because results don't show up just from listening. They show up because you did something. Even one small action this week will move the needle further than a month of good intentions. If you want to go deeper, scan the QR code and schedule a 30-minute strategy chat. I'd love to hear how you're using planning, leadership, and execution to make sure hope never becomes your business strategy. Drop a comment and like the episode. I'm Chuck Knabusch. Until next time, stay focused, stay disciplined, and don't you dare rely on hope.